In this episode of FTD Facts, I'll be exploring 10 surprising and interesting books that are not found in the New Testament of the Bible. How's it going, FTD fam? Welcome back to another episode. My name is Leroy Kenton, and now these books are similar to the content that is found in the New Testament, while others are just completely different. So let's begin. At number 10, we have the Epistle of Barnabas. This epistle was written after the destruction of the Jewish temple, but it was also written before the year 132. It was often attributed to Barnabas, the companion of Paul, but scholars say that it could actually be a different Barnabas that wrote this one. This book explores Christianity's relationship with Judaism, which was a big topic of debate at that time. And it rejects completely the value of the previous teachings in Judaism, and it also rejects all ceremonial aspects of Judaism. This Epistle of Barnabas makes arguments from the Torah to support Christianity as the true religion, and the Epistle of Barnabas quotes a lot of the Old Testament, including the book of Enoch, which is actually not even included in the Old Testament of the Bible. But since we're dealing with just books not in the New Testament, I'll save the book of Enoch for another video. Moving on now to number 9, we have the Apocalypse of Peter. The last book of the Bible, and perhaps the book that's most known even when it comes to non-biblical circles, well, it's a book of the apocalypse or Revelation. Some of you might know it as that. This book describes visions of the end times, as well as it describes what heaven is going to be like and things like that. However, this is not the only apocalypse book that was read by early Christians. Introducing the Apocalypse of Peter. This book is written in the form of a conversation between Jesus and his disciples, and it describes what happens in hell, and it also describes what happens in heaven. Now, this book is very descriptive, very detailed. It dives into like the type of punishments that people are going to receive for doing various different evil deeds if they're sent to hell. So for example, like those who blaspheme against God, they're hung by their tongues. And men and women who committed adultery, well, they're hung by their hair and their feet over a boiling substance, among many other descriptive things. Now, those people who are granted heaven, well, they are beautiful, they have great, amazing skin, they smell good, they get to live forever and sing beautiful songs. Number 8 brings us the infancy gospel of James. So there was many other gospels other than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that were written, and some specifically share details of the infancy of Jesus. And one of these infancy gospels is the Gospel of James. This focuses a lot on the importance of Mary, and it describes even her birth as well as her life growing up, and it sheds a lot of light on the early years of her son, Jesus. The gospel does claim that Mary was a perpetual virgin, and it details Jesus' early life in Egypt, as well as it looks at the similarities and the differences between Jesus and John the Baptist. The book also describes the nativity scene as something that happened in a cave. The next book is Shepherd of HERMAS. This book had a lot of influence on early Christianity. And now the shepherd was referenced by many early Christian fathers, for example, like Tertullian, Irenaeus, as well as Clement of Alexandria, and also Origen. It was used as scripture by some early churches, as well as it was rejected by others. And one quote from Origen says that, well, it's considered a scripture, but Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria said that is completely heretical. The Shepherd of HERMAS is very symbolic and is written mostly in the first person, describing the visions of Hermas, who was a former slave. It also includes 12 commandments as well as 10 parables, mostly dealing with things like Christian ethics. From there, we move on to 1 Clement. 1 Clement is one of 2 letters to the church in Corinth attributed to Pope Clement of Rome. Now, it was highly regarded, and it's one of the earliest written books that eventually failed to make it into the New Testament, being dated to be around 95 AD. The book itself is focused on a dispute in the church at Corinth about the removal of several church leaders, and Pope Clement had objected to this removal, so he wrote to them. Halfway in at number 5, we have the Gospel of Thomas. This is probably the most famous gospel that was not included in the New Testament. The Gospel of Thomas is not a book that was passed down through the ages, but it was actually rediscovered as part of the Nag Hammadi Library in the year 1945. And when it comes to the Gospel of Thomas, there's actually no real evidence that it was widely accepted by early Christians. People don't even know if it was highly read. But the Gospel of Thomas is completely different from the current 4 Gospels that are in the New Testament. It's simply a collection of sayings that are attributed to Jesus. A lot of them are wise sayings, parables, very cryptic sayings. The Gospel of Thomas has been one of the most widely studied books not included in the New Testament because of its content, like I just mentioned. All it does is focus on Jesus' teachings and how they lead to salvation once properly understood. It's a very fascinating book. I do have a copy myself, and yeah, it's an interesting read. Number 4 brings us to the lost epistles to the Corinthians. 1st and 2nd Corinthians are major epistles of Paul that are included in the New Testament of the Bible, and these letters are the basis of a lot of Christian ethics. But there were other letters between Paul and the Church of Corinth that weren't included. One of those letters actually was apparently written before 1st Corinthians, and it was actually referenced by Paul in 1 Corinthians 5 verse 9, where he says, "I wrote to you in my previous letter not to associate with sexually immoral people." Now, we have no evidence of this letter outside of this reference, but it makes you wonder what else Paul wrote. Number 3 brings us the 3rd letter to the Corinthians. This is another letter from Paul. This letter has survived, and it was included in some early lists as sacred, but by the 4th century though, it wasn't considered valid at all, so it was not included in the Bible. Unlike the 1st and 2nd epistles of Corinthians in the New Testament, this one is considered by many to be written by someone other than Paul. Perhaps one of Paul's students, or just somebody completely different. This letter deals with correcting the interpretation of the first 2 epistles. Number 2 is Q. Yeah, Q, that's it. Q is actually a supposed document. It's a hypothetical gospel that would contain the similarities between the 3 gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels. And it was to bridge the differences as well. Its existence was first proposed in 1900 by scholars trying to understand the similarities between the 3 books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All 3 Gospels share stories and phrases, and some of them even have direct quotes from each other, like literally word for word. Mark has the most in common with both Matthew and Luke, but there are parts of Matthew and Luke that are not in Mark, and of course each book contains parts that are not in any other book. And the tricky thing though is that back then there was no strict source referencing system when it came to writing, so the Q hypothesis claims that there could have been another gospel that included all, or at least the parts missing from Mark, of the similar content used in the 3 mentioned gospels. Now, where this hypothesis completely falls apart though is that we don't even have a copy or partial or any fragment of this document at all. Also, no books reference to it at all. It's just like a mysterious gospel. So at this point, it could have existed and it's lost forever, or it just hasn't been rediscovered yet, or it's just completely and totally made up. We end this episode off at number 1. We have the Didache. The Didache, which means the Lord's teachings of the 12 apostles, is a step-by-step instruction for Christian life. The first part of the Didache is on how Christians should apply God's commandments, okay? Then the second part is about the religious rituals like baptism and the Eucharist, as well as fasting. And then the third section is about how the church should be structured. The Didache was almost included in the New Testament, but it was ultimately rejected. And the big question though is, how would a book like this have influenced Christianity as we know it today if it was included? Having a step-by-step guideline for major religious obligations may have prevented the formation of the plethora of Christian branches that exist today. That concludes this episode. This was a look at 10 surprising books not included in the New Testament. Definitely want to hear your thoughts and comments. Sound off down below. If you did like this video, please like, share, as well as subscribe if this is your first time here to be notified when new videos are posted. Thanks for hanging out with me in this episode, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.